It is late February 1991. Darkness stretches across the desert. But something is moving faster than anyone could believe. 500,000 soldiers, thousands of tanks, miles of sand, and in just 100 hours, it will all vanish. In a Soviet bunker beneath Moscow, generals stare at screens that don't make sense. Reports of entire divisions disappearing. Tanks on fire without being touched. Electronic shrieks on the radio. Ghost signals on radar. Pilots see nothing and die anyway. The Americans are moving like a single, invisible organism, striking from nowhere, hitting everything unstoppable. The Iraqi army, once the fourth largest in the world, is routed, encircled, and destroyed. And the Soviet generals have no explanation, no new bombs, no secret superweapons. Just a network, a system of satellites, radars, and computers that make the impossible inevitable. This is the story of the highway of death. A war fought with silicon, data, and precision. A Cold War superpower rendered obsolete in 100 hours. It is late February 1991, and the world outside is calm, almost deceptively so. In a reinforced bunker deep beneath Moscow, the air is thick with tobacco smoke and tension. The fluorescent lights hum faintly, reflecting off the polished maps spread across the long table. This is no ordinary military center. It is the nerve center of a fading superpower. The Soviet Union, the army of tanks and artillery, of pyramids of bureaucracy and decades of meticulously drilled doctrine, is staring into a silence that is deafening. General Mikhail Moise, granite-faced and unflinching, studies the maps with an intensity only decades of service can produce. His eyes, sharp but weary, scan the symbols of Soviet armor, infantry positions, and radar grids. For weeks, he and his analysts have followed the unfolding American-led air campaign against Iraq with professional detachment. The airstrikes were expected, a precise harassing tool, but nothing they saw suggested catastrophe. At least, that was what they thought. Soviet military doctrine, drilled into every officer from Moscow to Baghdad, relied on predictability and hierarchy. Tanks were disciplined, air defenses layered, and artillery methodical. They could absorb punishment. They could fight wars like clockwork. A war of attrition, yes, but annihilation? Impossible. And then the reports began. First, there was confusion. Satellite feeds were misaligned. Signals intercepted from the Iraqi command were garbled, sometimes contradictory. But the anomalies multiplied. Moise's analysts saw what no one should have seen. Entire Iraqi units, once ready for battle, immobilized and burning. T-72 tanks are igniting seemingly on their own. Columns of trucks abandoned in the open desert. Soldiers fleeing without orders, their morale shattered. Impossible, muttered one junior officer, pushing his spectacles up nervously. It doesn't make sense. Yet the reports were precise. The American ground assault, codenamed Desert Saber, was supposed to take weeks, months even. The Soviet advisors and Iraqi generals had calculated it meticulously. Any maneuver through the featureless desert could be predicted, funneled, and destroyed. Yet the American columns had moved hundreds of kilometers through open sand at night in blinding sandstorms without detection. They had appeared on the Iraqi flank like ghosts, impossible to trace, impossible to stop. Moise felt a chill he could not shake. These were no lucky strikes, no isolated brilliance. This was systematic, almost surgical. The Americans were not fighting with brute force alone. They were orchestrating war as a network. Tanks, artillery, and aircraft were nodes in a single, interconnected system, moving with near-omniscient precision. As night deepened in the bunker, the reports became increasingly surreal. Iraqi pilots trained in Soviet MiG-29s described ghostly signals on their radar. Screens blank 1 second, lethal missiles appearing the next. A Top Gunner would see an F-15 engage a target, but the aircraft itself was invisible. No silhouette, no signature, just a missile striking a tank across the desert miles away. The theory of electronic jamming could not explain the scale, the precision, the speed. It defied logic, physics, and decades of military reasoning. Moise and his staff knew then that this was not a battlefield error. It was a revelation. Their entire understanding of war, of armor, of hierarchy was being shattered. The Soviet military-industrial machine, which had spent decades perfecting layered defenses and tank doctrines, was watching its philosophy evaporate in real time. The first reports of the so-called Highway of Death had not yet filtered in. Yet, even in this moment of tension, a grim realization was forming. This was not merely a battle lost. It was a civilization's method of war being eclipsed by something entirely new. Moise, his face stoic, understood the full gravity of the situation. The Americans were playing a game that Moscow had not even imagined. Tanks, aircraft, missiles, all powerful, but irrelevant when disconnected from information. The Soviets had mastered steel. The Americans had mastered the invisible nervous system that controlled it, and the clock was ticking. February 24th, 1991. The night is cold and unforgiving over the Kuwaiti desert, but the darkness hides something far more terrifying than the chill. To the naked eye, the sands seem empty, barren, but the Americans are moving, not slowly, not cautiously, but with the precision of a machine, a ghost army advancing hundreds of kilometers without detection. The Iraqi forces, once a formidable barrier, are caught off guard. The Republican Guard, trained in Soviet doctrine, expected the Americans to punch in predictable vectors, to be channeled into kill zones. Their tanks, proud T-72s and T-55s, their BMP infantry carriers, their artillery, ready, waiting, confident. And yet, at the very first glimmer of sunrise, their formations are already disintegrating. Columns of vehicles clog the highways, engines idling in panic, crews abandoning posts in disbelief. For the Soviet advisors observing from Baghdad, the reality is incomprehensible. Every calculation they had relied upon, every principle of maneuver warfare, is being contradicted. A battalion expected to hold a flank finds itself bypassed entirely. Commanders in the field scramble for orders that never come. Units vanish from a map, not destroyed in combat, but erased as if a god had swept through the desert. The air war is equally surreal. Iraqi radar operators, trained on decades of Soviet technology, report phantom targets, F-15s and F-16s, that appear only long enough to destroy a target and then vanish. MiG, 29 pilots describe an invisible sky, their screens flickering white, instruments screaming missile locks from enemies they cannot see. Their own weapon systems, the very tools that once made them masters of the air, are nullified in a symphony of electronic dominance. On the ground, the Americans leverage technology and timing like no force before them. GPS-guided artillery moves with surgical precision, striking supply convoys before crews even understand the threat. Tanks advance in perfect formation, every vehicle knowing its position, every commander aware of his allies' locations. The American army moves not as individuals, but as a single organism, each node feeding data into the network. The result is chaos of the Iraqi forces and a flawless, almost mechanical precision for the coalition. As the sun rises on Highway 80, the so-called Highway of Death, the horror begins to materialize. Columns of retreating Iraqi vehicles, tanks, trucks, buses, and stolen civilian cars stretch for miles. Exhausted soldiers and panicked crews jam the lanes, creating a bottleneck. This becomes a tableau of terror, the illusion of order collapsing into a funnel of death. American attack helicopters, F-15E Strike Eagles, A-10 Warthogs, and B-52 bombers move over the desert like predators, each strike coordinated with intelligence from the E-8 Joint Stars surveillance aircraft. The Joint Stars, flying high and unseen, scans tens of thousands of square miles, tracking every moving vehicle. Its operators feed the data instantly to AWACS, which in turn coordinates strike aircraft in real time. This is war conducted at a speed no human mind could fully process. Missiles find their targets before crews can react. Tanks are hit on their weakest points from miles away. Units that once considered themselves invincible vanish without a fight. In Baghdad, Soviet advisors scramble to interpret the reports. They search for explanations, new stealth technology, experimental weapons, supernatural intervention. Nothing fits. Every T-72 they helped supply, every radar network they had designed, every defensive doctrine they had taught the Iraqis collapses under the invisible hand of American coordination. For Moscow, the revelation is catastrophic. This is not luck, not clever tactics, not human error. This is a system, a network of sensors, satellites, and strike platforms acting as one entity. The highway of death is not a battle. It is a methodical eradication, a demonstration of information dominance that renders traditional armies irrelevant. By the end of the day, the carnage is indisputable. Thousands of Iraqi vehicles are destroyed. Soldiers lie in the desert, their armor gutted by missiles they never saw coming. Highway 80 becomes an inferno, black smoke rising into the morning sky, a monument to futility of resistance. To the Soviet generals observing through intercepted communications and reconnaissance, it is not only a tactical disaster. It is a revelation of a new era of war, one where steel and numbers no longer dictate victory. For the Americans, it is proof of a simple principle. When your network sees everything, coordinates everything, and strikes with precision, even the largest armies crumble. For the Soviets and Iraqis, it is incomprehensible, terrifying, and utterly unpreventable. Desert Saber has rewritten the rules of warfare in a matter of hours, and the old world is gone before it even realizes the battle has begun. February 25th, 1991. The sun rises over the Kuwaiti desert, painting the sand in harsh whites and golds. On the ground, the remnants of what had been the fourth largest army in the world begin to realize the scale of their failure. Highway 80 stretches ahead, a ribbon of steel, rubber, and fear. Iraqi soldiers cram into tanks, trucks, and commandeered civilian vehicles, desperate to escape the invisible net closing behind them. Exhausted, starving, terrified, their retreat is a moving target of desperation. From the sky, the American Air Forces observe with clinical precision. The 8 Joint Stars aircraft, perched hundreds of miles away, tracks every convoy, every tank, every retreating truck in real time. Its operators feed the data into AWACS, which orchestrates a symphony of strikes. F-15 Strike Eagles, A-10 Warthogs, and Apache helicopters all receive instantaneous coordinates. Each missile, each bomb, finds its target with unerring accuracy. The Iraqi T-72s, armored and proud, are reduced to smoking husks before their crews can even comprehend the threat. Inside the Iraqi vehicles, panic spreads like wildfire. Tank commanders turn dials and twist knobs, try and locate the enemy, only to find empty desert and blinking, static-filled radars. MiG. 29 pilots report phantom threats and invisible bombers. The sense of reality collapses. The world they knew, the principles of warfare they have been trained to obey, is gone. What they face is not human, but systematic, calculated, almost supernatural in its precision. A single helicopter spots AT-72 column 5 kilometers away. It doesn't fire blindly. It doesn't engage in chaotic maneuvers. It locks its sensors on the target, communicates digitally to the strike team, and launches a missile that finds the tank's weakest point, the top armor, obliterating it in an instant. On the ground, chaos becomes tangible. Convoys jam the 6-lane highway, engines stalling, soldiers abandoning vehicles in horror. Trucks carrying supplies burst into flame. Tanks erupt in clouds of fire and smoke. Survivors crawl out of overturned vehicles, eyes wide with disbelief. There is no retreat, no rallying point. Each mile of the highway becomes a kill zone, each vehicle a mark in a preordained sequence of destruction. For 10 hours, this ritual continues. Every movement is monitored, every target engaged, every strike coordinated by a digital network beyond human comprehension. Inside Baghdad and Moscow, the reports are equally surreal. Intercepted radio chatter, reconnaissance images, and satellite feeds tell a story that defies logic. Soviet officers struggle to reconcile the scale and precision of the destruction with the capabilities of the hardware they know. T-72 tanks, the backbone of the Red Army doctrine they taught, lie in heaps, turretless, gutted. Trucks, buses, and personnel carriers lie charred, immobilized. It is not chaos born of chance. It is chaos orchestrated. The Americans are not fighting like humans. They are operating as a single integrated organism. Electronic warfare amplifies the terror. The Iraqis' radar networks, built on Soviet SA-6, SA-8, and French Roland systems, are blinded. False signals and static confuse operators. Systems designed to detect incoming aircraft cannot discern the F-117 stealth fighters, invisible and untouchable. The illusion of security shatters. Commanders shout orders that go unheeded. Units turn in circles, trying to find direction. Panic becomes infectious, spreading along the line of retreat like a virus. By the afternoon, the desert is a graveyard. Satellite imagery, later transmitted to Moscow, shows the full horror. Thousands of vehicles burned, abandoned, and destroyed, stretching for miles. The highway of death becomes an emblem not just of the Iraqi military's collapse, but a new paradigm in warfare. Victory is no longer about numbers, training, or brute force. It is about information, speed, and coordination. The United States has demonstrated a system of systems where each soldier, each aircraft, each sensor is a node in a single nervous system. For the Iraqi troops, there is no dignity in retreat. They are hunted, observed, and eliminated with terrifying efficiency. Survivors describe helicopters that strike before they can even see them, aircraft that drop bombs on empty desert as if guided by unseen intelligence. Fear replaces strategy. Survival replaces combat. The psychological impact is catastrophic. The old world of armor clashes, entrenched positions, and linear assaults has vanished. They are trapped in a reality dictated by a network they cannot understand, much less counter. By nightfall, the highway of death lies in ruins. Smoke rises from hundreds of miles of desert. Burned-out tanks and vehicles litter the landscape. The American forces, unseen and untouchable, have completed a 10-hour operation that would have taken weeks in conventional warfare. The Iraqi army is not just defeated, it is erased. And the Soviet Union, watching from afar, begins to understand a terrifying truth. The era of traditional warfare, the one they had mastered for decades, is over. The invisible orchestra, technology as the ultimate weapon. As the smoke from the highway of death drifted over the desert, the true power behind the American victory remained largely unseen. It was not just bombs, bullets, or bravery. It was an invisible network that tied every soldier, aircraft, and sensor together into a single orchestrated organism. The E-8 Joint Stars aircraft, a modified Boeing 707 with a massive radar canoe beneath its fuselage, hovered far above the chaos, scanning a 20,000 square mile patch of desert. Inside, operators tracked every Iraqi vehicle, every moving unit, every escape attempt. Their screens displayed symbols and numbers, each representing a target in real time, each a node in a vast network. This was not reconnaissance. It was control. The Joint Stars did not merely watch. It directed, coordinated, and ensured precision beyond human reaction times. Connected to the J-Stars was the AWACS fleet, airborne early warning and control platforms that acted as a conductor for the symphony of American forces. From their vantage point, they saw everything. The approaching Iraqi convoys, the scattered T-72s, the hidden Republican Guard positions. They fed data directly to strike aircraft, eliminating the delay and confusion of radio commands. F-15E Strike Eagles and A-10 Warthogs received coordinates and target data digitally, bypassing human error. The result was a choreography of destruction so precise that Iraqi units had no chance to react, retreat, or regroup. Every missile fired, every bomb dropped, was pre-calculated, verified, and executed with surgical accuracy. The AH-64 Apache helicopters added another layer to this network. Unlike traditional attack helicopters, these machines were not searching blindly. Their Target Acquisition Designation Site, TDS, could lock onto targets fed by the J-Stars or AWACS. A tank commander sitting in AT-72, confident in his armor, had no idea that a Hellfire missile was tracking him from a ridge 5 miles away. The missile, guided by the network's coordinates, struck precisely where the armor was weakest, top down, bypassing every conventional defensive measure. Top-mounted ammunition storage, designed to speed reloads and increase firepower, became a liability. Crews were incinerated in milliseconds. Iraq's pride in Soviet armor dissolved into disbelief and fear. The battlefield was no longer a contest of force. It was a digital chessboard with American sensors, software, and processors playing all the pieces simultaneously. Even the ground movements of U.S. armor were part of this system. GPS satellites provided continuous jam-resistant positioning signals, allowing M1 Abrams tanks, Bradley fighting vehicles, and supporting infantry to move in perfect synchronization, day or night, through blinding sandstorms. While Soviet doctrine relied on maps, phase lines, and top-down orders, the Americans navigated by a real-time nervous system. Every unit knew its exact location, and the location of every ally and enemy unit within miles. The Soviets, watching from Baghdad and Moscow, could only stare at the reports. Their calculations, trained over decades of armored warfare theory, simply could not compute this level of coordination. Tanks, artillery, and aircraft were no longer separate entities. They were extensions of a single brain operating at the speed of light. The psychological impact on Iraqi troops was devastating. Pilots reported radar screens filled with static, systems that should have detected enemy aircraft showing nothing, yet their comrades were struck or disappeared from the sky. On the ground, T-72 crews tried to form defensive lines, only to watch their neighbors disintegrate under invisible fire. The Americans were everywhere and nowhere, a collective intelligence that could anticipate movements, strike from miles away, and vanish before detection. It was a demonstration not just of superior hardware, but of superior integration, a lesson the Soviet analysts would later call the orchestration of war itself. In Moscow, GRU and KGB analysts struggled to describe the horror. Their military textbooks detailed armor clashes, air raids, and artillery barges, but nothing prepared them for a war conducted through invisible networks. They theorized new weapons, ghost planes, energy beams, even orbital strikes, but none of it captured the real truth. The Americans had not created a single superweapon. They had created a system of systems, where GPS, J-stars, AWACS, attack aircraft, artillery, and digital communication fused into a single, unstoppable entity. This system could see, coordinate, and strike with perfect timing. It was decentralized yet unified, faster than human thought, and nearly omniscient. By the time the 100-hour war ended, the lesson was clear. Brute force was obsolete. Information, speed, and integration defined modern warfare. The Soviet Union, the world's master of armored doctrine and centralized control, had built an army to fight the last war. The Americans had built a system to fight the next one. Highway 80, the highway of death, was not simply a battlefield. It was the proof that a new era of war had arrived. The American military had achieved what no single tank, bomber, or soldier could accomplish alone. It created a digital, coordinated god of war, invisible, precise, and terrifyingly efficient. The epilogue of the Cold War. By the summer of 1991, the reality that had been slowly dawning on the Soviet generals had crystallized into a stark, unavoidable truth. The highway of death was not merely a battlefield defeat. It was a demonstration of an entirely new era of warfare. The reports, satellite imagery, intelligence briefings, and first-hand accounts that had been painstakingly collected over months painted an incontrovertible picture. The Iraqi Republican Guard, equipped with some of the most advanced Soviet hardware outside the USSR, had been systematically neutralized with minimal casualties to the Americans. Tanks, armored personnel carriers, and artillery, symbols of Red Army power, had been rendered irrelevant. Their crews burned, abandoned, or captured, victims of precise, almost surgical orchestration of information and firepower. The shock in Moscow was as intellectual as it was military. For decades, the Soviet Union had prided itself on strategic depth, operational art, and the sheer weight of its armored and missile forces. Its generals were masters of doctrine, rigorously trained to calculate the outcome of every move in a battle. But here was a force that had discarded such constraints entirely. The American military had introduced something that could not be seen on the parade grounds of Red Square, could not be touched in tank factories, and could not be cataloged in thick military manuals. The invisible architecture of a networked army. Satellites, GPS, airborne radar platforms, and integrated strike aircraft had combined into a living system, one that could see, anticipate, and destroy with a speed and precision beyond comprehension. As analysts in the GRU, KGB, and Ministry of Defense dissected every element, a terrifying pattern emerged. This was not merely a superior weapon, it was a superior philosophy. Whereas Soviet forces had operated with a rigid hierarchy, centralized command, and slow feedback loops, the Americans had created a decentralized, resilient system. Individual nodes, be they a tank commander, an F-15 pilot, or an Apache crew, were guided by a continuous stream of live information. Every movement was calculated, verified, and executed with exactitude. The Soviet Army, with all its might and discipline, had become a machine designed for a war that no longer existed. The political implications were immediate and profound. In the Kremlin, as analysts briefed the Politburo and military leadership, it became clear that the Cold War balance of power had shifted not through nuclear missiles, espionage, or ideological contests, but through the mastery of information itself. The Soviet Union had invested decades and a quarter of its GDP into building the world's most formidable conventional military. Yet a relatively small American force, leveraging networks, precision guidance, and situational awareness, had decisively outmaneuvered and annihilated the supposedly invincible Iraqi army, exposing the USSR's systemic vulnerabilities. The highway of death became the symbol of this transformation. Where Western media saw a military catastrophe, Soviet officers saw the demonstration of a completely new logic of war. Here, thousands of vehicles have been destroyed not in chaotic combat, but with methodical precision. Here, traditional doctrines of tank-on-tank confrontation have been rendered obsolete. Here, the future of warfare had been revealed. Speed, intelligence, and connectivity mattered more than mass, armor, or firepower. The message was clear. War was no longer about brute force. It was about knowledge, networks, and anticipation. By the autumn of 1991, as the Soviet Union began its final chaotic months, these lessons were being internalized too late. The military establishment, already strained by decades of economic stagnation and political dysfunction, realized that it had been outpaced not by espionage, but by invention. The U.S. had created a system that integrated every platform, sensor, and operator into a single, coherent organism. The highway of death had been the first public demonstration, but the principles underpinning it would define the next century of warfare. The Soviets had learned a painful lesson. Innovation could not be stolen, and philosophy could not be copied. Systems, networks, and ideas had replaced tanks and artillery as a decisive force in modern combat. Ultimately, the highway of death was more than a military engagement. It was a revelation, a foreshadowing of the 21st century battle space. It marked the end of an era where armies could dominate through size and firepower alone. It revealed that the future belonged to those who could see, coordinate, and act faster than their adversaries. The Soviet generals had spent a lifetime preparing for wars like those of the Second World War. Yet the Americans had fought a war that existed only in theory until it was executed flawlessly. A war of information, synchronization, and precision. In the grand sweep of history, the highway of death stands not just as a testament to American ingenuity and military dominance, but as a lesson in the evolution of warfare. It shows how a smaller, well-networked, and technologically integrated force can decisively overcome a larger, slower, and more traditional opponent. And for the Soviet Union, it was a warning written in fire and steel. The future belongs not to the strongest or the most numerous, but to those who understand the invisible architecture of war. The Cold War, once a stalemate, had quietly been decided, not on the ground, in the skies, or in nuclear silos, but in the digital networks that connected soldiers, sensors, and satellites in a way the world had never seen before.